I wish I could go back to 40 years ago and tell people, pool your resources and preserve the best of what's here while things improve. Just make sure that we have some skin in the game, because that didn't happen.
A lot of people are getting pushed out of the city. And where do you go when your community and your work is in one place and you can't afford to live there anymore?
I've had 3 battles with landlords in this town. 3 major battles. I never thought I would ever be homeless. I've always had a home. And for 10 years not having one, essentially it's taken quite a toll on my health.
Right now we approach housing like it's a commodity. We did bought and sold, at market rates. We don't do that with other things. We don't do that with water. We don't do that with power. There are other things that are either publicly owned or highly regulated. And we do that because those things are absolutely necessary for life. And I think housing's like that.
When people lose housing in this town right now, they're going to scramble. A lot of people think San Francisco is the cool place to live. Well, it's one thing to say I can't live in the cool place anymore, but it's another to say I'm going to live in my car unless I can find a place to live.
People who live here love living here, and I think they don't realize that it's not a place where you can just quickly find another place to live. If you haven't had to try to find a new place in a hurry in San Francisco, then you don't realize how challenging it is.
The tenant becomes more vulnerable to eviction, the landlord becomes more vulnerable to foreclosure, and suddenly we're in a collapse in the housing relationship.
San Francisco is a different environment. It's not like the business improvement districts in other cities where they view homeless people as an enemy. Homeless people is actually a bad term. It's a human who's experiencing the state of being homeless.
We're a society that works to educate our people for free, that has public libraries, that takes care of our seniors, and yet in the last couple of generations have allowed a whole segment of society to become the dispossessed. It's John Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath at the dawn of the 21st century.
One of the things about housing in general is that we think of it as a place where you can go and be free from a lot of the concerns of the world, and a place where you can retreat to safety. And for people that don't have that, either because of conflict in their place of safety or because they don't have the comfort to know that if they pay their bills, they'll be able to stay there because of threats of eviction, then their life just feels incredibly different. The cost of living in the city is exorbitant, and the current rates, if you've been in a rent-control apartment, if you have to now find a place at market rate, the difference is unaffordable, and so people don't stay in San Francisco. And so the threat of being evicted is not just that you lose your place and can go get another place, which would be the case in almost every other city in the country. But in San Francisco, if you lose your place where you're living, quite frankly, your life is overturned. You don't get to stay in the city. So you have to move to a completely different city. So it's not that you're just being evicted from your place or losing your place. You're losing your life as you know it. You're now being forced into a completely different situation where everything's turned upside down. And even moving to the East Bay, which people used to be able to do, now has become unaffordable as well. Even that is still a tremendous shift if you live in Polk District and you walk to all your neighborhood stores and you walk to see your friends. If you now have to take a BART train across the bay and another shuttle to where you live, it's a completely different life. And I think San Francisco is one of the places, New York City is another one, where if you lose your house, your life becomes completely different than what it has been. And so I think it becomes a human rights issue.
Housing in San Francisco is just seemingly case study after case study, everything from gentrification to housing prices to what happens when tech sweeps the city, et cetera, et cetera. I've seen all of that stuff in the Lower Polk district.
This whole mythology of people flock to San Francisco because we're a liberal city and we're so generous is actually not true. The statistics show that close to 70% of the homeless people used to be housed in San Francisco. Many of them were born and raised here. Close to 2/3 of the people that we walk by used to be our house neighbors. So the best way to stop homelessness is to keep people housed.
We were facing new construction, new development that was changing the nature of the building stock and certainly the demographics of the neighborhood. And a lot of people who had been long-term residents were feeling the pressure from that. And, housing is one of the largest issues that we face in San Francisco. So in Lower Polk, we wanted to preserve the authenticity of the neighborhood and the character. And the best way to do that is to help people who are in crisis, who are in danger of losing their homes and as a result being pushed out of the neighborhood.
Right about that time, I was walking with my old boss, Christian Martin, and he's like, "Kevin, you know anything about landlord tenant law?" And I go, "Yeah, that was actually my focus in law school." And property law in general, all sorts of anything having to do with the concept of property. He goes, "Well, Supervisor Peskin has this idea of maybe we should start some sort of thing or clinic or something."
The southeast corner of the district that I represent, when I first started, really had no organized neighborhood voice, no organized tenants voice. And when I ran for re-election in the year 2015, the number of evictions in this corner of my district were going off the hook. Gentrification was happening. And as part of my campaign, I organized a series of tenant workshops. And when I got elected, I tried to institutionalize that, and that became TLC.
Basically, Kevin came to my office and we sat down and we worked on this grant. And I said, you know what, let's try to get some Hastings law grads there to help with the clinic. It's such an important legal issue. We potentially undertrain our new lawyers on housing issues because it doesn't jump out there like environmental law or criminal law overhaul. It just doesn't seem like as important of an issue as it really is. But I remember we had a big lunch with everyone after the clinic launched, and we were like, let's try to end homelessness. And we were kind of joking. We were like, no, but seriously though, this is the goal of this clinic is to end homelessness. And so it's not just to resolve disputes among people. Like that is something we can do right now. But we want to end homelessness. And that is a rallying cry for everybody who's been involved in this project. And we're all on the same page about that. And so what the clinic is doing is, one step towards that goal.
So the TLC is really different. We've partnered with the Lower Polk TLC to provide free mediation services to residents, tenants, housing providers, master tenants, subtenants, and now through the Lower Polk, small merchant mediation as well. We really do feel strongly that conflict is part of everyday life, and engaging in conflict is really important. And we start small with, can we have a conversation about this? And there might be some very high escalated emotions around what's going on. And we understand that, we're not afraid of that, and we need that to also air and come forward. And it's amazing the way that mediation can position folks or place people in a conversation together that they never thought they could really have. And part of that is because a neutral from the outside, so skilled in bringing forward that conversation, makes all the difference. And pretty soon, ideally, what you really want to see happen is they're no longer talking to the mediator, they're talking to each other.
It's not all about adversarial, tenant-landlord fights, but it's also about giving landlords and tenants a way to mediate between them, to work stuff out. Education, mediation, not only for tenants, but also for landlords. And most recently, they moved from the residential side to the commercial side, which has really been a godsend.
One thing that we really find valuable with the way that the Lower Polk TLC handles it is this non-adversarial approach. We talk with a lot of landlords and tenants every day. And sometimes what we hear is that they're hesitant to access city services or work with an organization about their landlord-tenant issues because maybe they think that the city won't take them seriously, or the city has a certain perspective towards what a landlord is and what a tenant is and how the relationship should be. And so the TLC has a really sort of valuable role in providing services, mediation, information, resources, because oftentimes with rent control, the housing that people have now is the most affordable housing that they're going to get. And you don't run the risk of them having to find housing elsewhere in the Bay Area, and then eventually sort of falling down the rungs of the economic ladder.
In a housing market like San Francisco, where there's so much that's up in the air right now, mediation is something that allows for a whole nother dimension to come in. It's like, okay, rather than digging in our heels, let's just go time out here for a second. What can we do to just talk about what our interests are here? Because, most people want the same things. Everybody wants what's fair, okay? We define fair differently, but we can usually agree on that. Do you want what's fair? I want what's fair. Let's figure that out. But usually what I have found, and it's the reason that I'm a mediator, is that it's ultimately so much more efficient and effective than going to war. Let's have a discussion and find a way to solve our problems together.
We're filming this in COVID, so my biggest concern now is how the vulnerabilities may exponentially be apparent with us. But those challenges are also opportunities, and it may allow for innovation and transformation to take place more quickly than we ever thought might be possible. I think we're already seeing evidence of that now, with everything being pushed online, including conflict resolution, and we are right there online. Mediating conflicts will continue to build so that we are there to support and de-escalate what vulnerabilities might be there.
One of the reasons people love San Francisco is because it is the place where every type of person is welcome, where every type of idea is considered. It's the most open and diverse place in the country. And I think the concern is that we lose some of that, and that if we start to become homogenous and we have one group that becomes disproportionately influential. And I think the concern for people is that young tech people with money, because those are the people who can afford housing at market rate, which is great to have their voice in the city, but we don't want it to become the only voice. And so I think the fear is a monoculture.
San Francisco is its people. I mean, we got some beautiful sights and natural beauty, but at the end of the day, what makes this city what it is? People who live here. If you're gonna have a city that is just for really high-end earners, it's not a city I'm particularly interested in living in. You know, there's been a huge amount of displacement from the city. There've been huge wave of higher earners, and those folks are welcome in the city too, but you know, not at the expense of driving our long-term residents out. I mean, we get waves of immigration, and we want that, right? We want new blood and new folks moving into any city, right? That's what keeps it interesting. But the other part of what keeps it interesting is all the amazing characters that have been here for a while and can teach all of us a thing or two.
I was just homeless myself. I was living in transitional housing. I got evicted out of transitional housing. And so I know what it's like. So when people approach us and they're worried and whatever, I'm like, no, I know what it's like. That sort of thinking informs what we do, you know, because the last thing that I want the Tenant Landlord Clinic to be is just something that's on paper or something where we're doing it for the recognition or the, you know, the brownie points. It's for the people that we're helping. You know, I don't want to get too emotional, but I've been there, you know, and it sucks. And for people who haven't been there and who try and deliver these services, it's like they'll never understand what it's like. You know, they just don't get it. And so one of the things for me is like, every time I do this, I think about like, what's it like to be that person who's approaching us? We don't try and make people jump through hoops to get services. We jump through hoops to deliver services.